October 2001 was unusually warm in Washington. Golden maple leaves carpeted the paths of Rock Creek Park, and the city was still reeling from the shock of September 11th. Everywhere there were increased patrols and a sense of unease. But life went on, and on college campuses, students were preparing for exams, attending parties, and making plans for the future. Kayla Clark, a 22-year-old journalism student at Georgetown University, stood out among her peers not only for her attractive appearance, but also for her determination. Tall, with long brown hair and an open smile, she dreamed of becoming a political commentator, and many had no doubt that one day her name would appear in the pages of the Washington Post. "She was a ray of light in our family," recalls Carol Clark, Kayla's mother, clutching a photo of her daughter. "Every time she walked into a room, it lit up." October 15th, 2001. The day began as usual. Morning lectures, lunch at the university cafeteria, preparation for a seminar in the library. In the evening, Kayla planned to go to a party with her friends in the Adams Morgan neighborhood, a trendy and lively corner of Washington. At 7:30 p.m., Kayla called her mother. "It was a normal conversation," says Carol, whose eyes still fill with tears when she remembers that last phone call. She talked about an upcoming test, asked for a recipe for chicken soup, and said she would come over on Sunday for a family dinner. No one could have guessed that this would be the last time Carol would hear her daughter's voice. The party was at the apartment of Trevor Patterson, one of Kayla's classmates. The small third-floor room in an old brick building was filled with students. Muffled music, laughter, conversations about school, a typical college party in the early 2000s. Kayla arrived around 8, Trevor recalls. She was in a good mood, joking a lot. She was wearing jeans, a white sweater, and her favorite leather jacket, which she had bought during a summer trip to New York. Lauren Miller, a close friend of Kayla's, was one of the last people to see her alive. "We talked about an upcoming journalism conference in Boston," Lauren says, nervously fiddling with the bracelet on her wrist. Kayla was so excited. She had been invited to give a presentation on the impact of new media on political journalism. Surveillance cameras captured Kayla leaving Trevor's house at 11:47 p.m. She waved goodbye and headed for her silver Honda Civic, parked a couple of blocks away. The night was clear and cool. The street was quiet. Most of the bars had already closed. Several passers-by saw Kayla walking briskly, looking back from time to time, the usual caution of a young woman returning to her car in the city at night. Robert Clark, Kayla's father, always waited for his daughter to text him to say she had arrived home safely. That night, there was no message. At first, he didn't think much of it, but when her phone was unreachable in the morning and her roommate confirmed that Kayla hadn't returned, his concern turned to real fear. "I knew my daughter," Robert says, staring intently at the camera. "She was always reliable. If she promised to call, she called. I knew right away that something bad had happened." At 10:22 a.m. on October 16th, Patrol Officer Marcus Johnson discovered a parked Honda Civic with Kayla's license plate on a deserted access road to Rock Creek Park. The location was secluded, surrounded by dense trees, away from major routes. "At first, I thought someone had just left the car overnight." That happens, Officer Johnson recalls. "But when I got closer and looked through the window," Kayla Clark was slumped in the driver's seat. 3 bullet wounds to the chest left her no chance of survival. According to the medical examiner, death occurred between midnight and 2 a.m. The autumn wind swayed the branches of the trees above the crime scene when the investigation team arrived. Yellow police tape cordoned off the area, and forensic experts methodically collected evidence, photographed the crime scene, and took fingerprints. Detective Sean Riley, a veteran of the Homicide Division, was one of the first to arrive. He had seen a lot in his 18 years on the force, but something about this murder immediately struck him as unusual. 3 shots at close range, Riley commented. No signs of a struggle, the purse and valuables were left untouched. This was not a robbery or a random act of violence. Someone was deliberately waiting for Kayla or following her. Forensic experts found 3 9mm shell casings on the asphalt next to the car. Ballistic analysis later determined that the shots were fired from the same weapon, presumably a Glock 19 pistol. No weapon was found at the scene of the crime. The absence of a weapon often indicates premeditated murder, explains forensic scientist Edward Ramirez. The killer took the gun with him, which suggests a certain degree of caution and planning. The most unusual aspect was the location of the car. Rock Creek Park was in the opposite direction from Kayla's apartment. To end up there, she must have deliberately changed her route, or someone must have forced her to drive in that direction. By evening, news of the young student's murder had spread throughout the city. Local television stations interrupted their regular programming for emergency news broadcasts. "A brutal murder has shocked Washington," reported the evening news anchor. Kayla Clark, a 22-year-old student at Georgetown University, was found shot dead in her car near Rock Creek Park. The police are asking anyone who may have seen anything suspicious to contact the department. The Clark family home in the suburbs of Washington was instantly transformed into a place of mourning. Relatives, friends, neighbors, everyone came to support Kayla's parents. Carol, overcome with grief, was unable to speak. Robert, trying to hold it together, accepted condolences, but his eyes showed the expression of a man whose world had collapsed in an instant. "It was like a nightmare," recalls Michael, Kayla's younger brother, who was 17 at the time. "I refused to believe it. Everything seemed unreal." In Kayla's bedroom in her parents' house, everything remained as it had been when she was alive. Photos of friends, stacks of books, a tennis racket in the corner. On her desk was a half-finished article for the university newspaper and a note reminding her to buy a birthday present for her mother. The police began interviewing witnesses. Everyone who was at the party, everyone who knew Kayla, everyone who might have seen anything suspicious in the park area. "We had several witnesses who saw a silver Honda Civic heading toward the park around midnight," Detective Riley said. One claimed to have noticed another car following the Honda at a short distance, but could not describe the make or color. Investigators checked surveillance cameras along the route. Several recorded Kayla's car, but the quality of the recording did not allow them to clearly distinguish whether she was alone or with someone else. Nothing unusual was found during a search of Kayla's apartment. Her computer was seized for analysis. Phone records showed normal activity, calls to friends, parents, and classmates. No obvious threats, no strange contacts. Kayla Clark's funeral was held on October 20th. Hundreds of people came to say goodbye to the young woman whose life had ended so tragically. Teachers spoke of her talent, friends remembered her smile, and relatives did not hide their tears. "It wasn't just the loss of a daughter," says Robert Clark, looking into the distance. "It was the loss of a future. Everything that could have been." At the Washington Police Department, detectives continued to analyze the evidence. But the main question remained unanswered. Who decided to end Kayla's life, and why? A week after the murder, the police released a sketch of a man who, according to a witness, was acting suspiciously near the place where the body was found. A young man, 25-30 years old, of average height, wearing a dark jacket and baseball cap. But the description was too vague and did not yield any results. An analysis of Kayla's computer revealed something interesting. A week before her death, she had received several anonymous threatening letters from a temporary address that could not be traced. "I know what you're doing. Stop, or you'll regret it," read one of them. Kayla didn't mention these letters to her parents or friends. She only made a short note in her diary. "Strange messages. Probably someone's stupid joke. I'll talk to Elle tomorrow." Who was this Elle? And what actions of Kayla's were referred to in the threats? These questions remained unanswered. 1 month of investigation followed another. Investigators checked dozens of potential suspects, Kayla's ex-boyfriends, neighbors, classmates, but no one had a motive or the opportunity to commit this crime. By the end of 2001, the intensity of the investigation had decreased. Other crimes and other victims demanded the attention of the police. The Kayla Clark case gradually moved into the cold category, those that remain unsolved for years. But for the Clark family, time did not heal the wounds. Every day without answers, every day without justice, was unbearable. "I promised my daughter that I would find the person who did this," Robert Clark says, clenching his fists. "And I will keep my promise, no matter what it takes." Neither he nor anyone else could have imagined that the path to the truth would take nearly 2 decades, and that the answer would be more shocking than anyone could have imagined. In the first weeks after Kayla Clark's murder, the Washington police worked almost around the clock. The Homicide Division assigned a special team of 6 detectives to the case, led by Sean Riley. Their temporary headquarters was located in a small room on the 2nd floor of the police station, with walls covered with crime scene photos, route maps, and timelines of events. In the center was a large portrait of a smiling Kayla. In the first few days after the murder, the phones didn't stop ringing, Riley recalls, running his hand through his graying hair. Dozens of calls, hundreds of potential leads. Some just wanted to help, others craved fame. Our job was to separate the wheat from the chaff. One of the first to be questioned was Jason Taylor, Kayla's ex-boyfriend. Their relationship had ended 3 months before the murder, but according to friends, the breakup was not a smooth one. "Jason didn't seem like a heartbroken ex," says Detective Alicia Morales, who was part of the investigation team. "When we told him about Kayla's death, he looked shocked, but somehow not. Too calm, too collected." Jason's interrogation took place in a standard police department interrogation room. Gray walls, a metal table, 2 surveillance cameras. Jason, a 23-year-old engineering student, sat upright and answered questions clearly and to the point. "Yes, we dated for about a year. We broke up in July." His voice was steady, without emotion. "Kayla was the one who initiated it. She said we were too different, that she needed to focus on her studies and career." When asked about his whereabouts on the night of the murder, Jason replied that he was working the night shift at the Student Computer Center, where he worked part-time as a system administrator. His words were confirmed by surveillance camera footage and the testimony of several students who worked there. "I had an alibi," Jason says now, years after the tragedy. "But they still considered me a suspect. I understand that an ex-boyfriend is always on the list of suspects. It's logical. But I loved Kayla, even after we broke up. I would never have hurt her." The next important witness was Lauren Miller, Kayla's best friend and the last person to see her alive at the party. Unlike the composed Jason, Lauren could barely contain her emotions during the interrogation. "I can't believe she's gone," she repeated, wiping away tears. "We talked about such silly things, about the conference, her new article, the need to update her wardrobe before winter. If I had known that would be our last conversation." Lauren described in detail the last hours she spent with Kayla at the party. According to her, Kayla was in high spirits, joking a lot and discussing plans for the future. She was going to go home, Lauren said. She said she was tired and wanted to get some sleep before her morning class. Kayla was always very responsible. When asked if she had noticed anything unusual in her friend's behavior in recent days, Lauren paused. "There was one moment a week before it happened." Her voice trembled. "We were sitting in a cafe and Kayla got a call. She didn't answer, she just looked at the screen and frowned. I asked who it was, and she replied, 'No one important.' But then she seemed tense." This episode caught the attention of investigators. A detailed analysis of Kayla's phone records revealed several calls from an unidentified number during the week before the murder. The calls lasted only a few seconds, indicating that Kayla either did not answer or immediately hung up. "We tried to trace the number," Riley explains. "It turned out to be a disposable phone purchased with cash at an electronics store in a Washington suburb. The store's surveillance cameras only kept recordings for 72 hours, so by the time we got there, the recording we needed had already been deleted." Another interesting lead was the anonymous threatening emails found on Kayla's computer. The police tried to trace the sender's IP address, but it was hidden behind several proxy servers. In 2001, our capabilities for tracking electronic communications were much more limited than they are today, explains FBI computer expert Marcus Chen, who was brought in to assist with the investigation. A technically savvy person could easily cover their tracks on the internet. Nevertheless, anonymous threats and strange phone calls indicated that the murder was not a spontaneous act. Someone was deliberately stalking Kayla. The November rains gave way to December snowfalls, and the investigation continued to check one version after another. Kayla's circle of acquaintances was established. Dozens of classmates, teachers, dorm neighbors, and colleagues from her part-time job at the university newspaper. Everyone was checked. Everyone was questioned. We considered all possible motives, Riley says. Jealousy, revenge, a random attack that went wrong. There was even a possibility that Kayla could have been killed because of some material she was working on for her journalism internship. This version seemed promising for a while. A month before her death, Kayla began an internship at a small online publication specializing in investigative journalism. The police examined all her notes and drafts, but found nothing that could have been a motive for murder. Mostly they were articles about student life, interviews with professors, reviews of cultural events, recalls the publication's editor, Greg Porter. Nothing that could have angered anyone enough to kill Kayla. She was talented, but she was just starting out in journalism. She hadn't done any serious investigative work yet. By Christmas 2001, the pace of the investigation had slowed significantly. Most of the leads had come to nothing. The people in Kayla's circle gradually returned to their normal lives, although for her family, there could be no such thing as a normal life anymore. Every holiday without Kayla was torture, recalls Carol Clark. Christmas, Thanksgiving, birthdays. Her room remained untouched, as if she could return at any moment. In January 2002, there was an unexpected turn of events. The police received an anonymous call from a person who claimed to have seen Kayla on the night of the murder, not alone, but with a man. They were allegedly sitting in a car and arguing intensely about something. Detectives immediately began searching for this witness, but to no avail. However, a week later, a woman named Nancy Howard, who worked at a 24-hour diner near the scene of the murder, came forward. "I saw them around midnight," Nancy said. "A girl who looked like the one on the news and some guy. They stopped in the parking lot in front of the diner. They didn't get out of the car, they just sat there talking. Or rather, arguing. I noticed them because the girl looked upset. I even wondered if she needed help. But then they drove away." Nancy's description of the man was vague. Just a regular guy, dark hair, dark jacket. Nothing that could help identify him specifically. Nancy's testimony contradicted our previous reconstructions of events, Riley explains. If Kayla really did meet someone after the party, it completely changed the picture. But there was one but. The diner was on the opposite side of Rock Creek Park from where the body was found. If they were there at 12:30 a.m., how did Kayla end up in the park less than an hour later? It didn't add up. To verify Nancy's testimony, investigators requested footage from surveillance cameras installed in the diner's neighborhood. Unfortunately, the only camera that could have captured the parking lot was not working that night. Meanwhile, forensic experts continued to analyze evidence from the crime scene. 3 shell casings found near the car were entered into the ballistics database, but no matches were found. The weapon used to fire the shots had not been used in any other reported crimes. Tire tracks around the crime scene indicate that there was another car there, says criminalist Ramirez. But because of the rain that night, the prints were blurred, and we couldn't determine the model. By the spring of 2002, the investigation had virtually stalled. Detective Riley and his team reviewed dozens of theories, interviewed more than 100 witnesses, and checked every possible lead, but they never got any closer to solving the case. It was one of the most difficult cases of my career, Riley admits. We had a victim with no apparent enemies, a crime scene with minimal evidence, and a lot of conflicting testimony. It was the perfect puzzle. Kayla's parents did not give up. They hired a private investigator, offered a reward for information leading to the arrest of the killer, and regularly appeared in the media to keep the case in the public eye. My husband and I vowed that we would not rest until we found the person who took our daughter from us, says Carol Clark, sitting in the living room of her home, where time seems to have stood still. Robert quit his job to devote himself entirely to the search. Robert Clark, a former engineer, turned part of his home into a makeshift headquarters. The walls are covered with photographs, maps, and notes. On the table are folders with copies of police reports he managed to obtain. Every day, he methodically reviews the materials, looking for anything the investigators might have missed. Sometimes I feel like the answer is right in front of us, he says, that the necessary detail is already in these papers, we just don't see its significance. In the summer of 2002, another strange episode occurred. Lauren Miller, Kayla's friend, told the police that she had noticed a man in a car following her in the parking lot near her house. When she tried to approach, the car quickly drove away. "I didn't see the person's face," Lauren said in a trembling voice, "but I had this awful feeling that it was somehow connected to Kayla, as if someone was following me because I knew her." The police increased patrols in the area where Lauren lived, but the suspicious car never reappeared. Whether it was related to Kayla's murder or just a coincidence remained unclear. By the fall of 2002, a year after the murder, Kayla Clark's case was officially classified as cold. This did not mean that the investigation had been completely abandoned. New leads were checked from time to time, but the police's main resources were redirected to other, more recent cases. "That's the hardest part of our job," Riley admits. "Telling the victim's family that we're not making any progress, that we can't find their child's killer. To see the hope in their eyes and know that you may not be able to fulfill it." On the anniversary of Kayla's death, the Clark family organized a memorial ceremony in Rock Creek Park, not far from where her body was found. Dozens of people, relatives, friends, classmates, gathered to honor her memory. They brought flowers, lit candles, and shared memories of the girl whose life was cut short so early and so tragically. "We don't want Kayla to be remembered only as a victim of crime," Robert Clark said at the time. "She was bright, talented, full of life. She had a future that was taken from her, and we have to find the person who did this. If not for justice, then at least so that he can't do it again." But despite all their efforts, the investigation reached a dead end. The police had a lot of scattered facts, conflicting testimonies, and minor details that did not fit together into a coherent picture. The Kayla Clark case became one of many unsolved murders in the archives of the Washington Police Department. No one could have imagined that many years would pass before new clues would emerge in this story, and that the answer would be much closer than anyone could have imagined. Time marches on relentlessly, even when it seems to stand still. For the Clark family, life was divided into before and after, before Kayla's murder and after. Every day became a test, every holiday a reminder of who was no longer there. Since 2003, the Clark family has held annual memorial rallies on the anniversary of Kayla's death. At first, they gathered hundreds of people, relatives, friends, classmates, and concerned Washington residents. Over time, the number of participants dwindled, but one thing remained unchanged: Robert Clark's unwavering determination to find his daughter's killer. "Every year we come here not only to honor Kayla's memory," Robert said on the third anniversary of the tragedy, standing in the drizzling rain in Rock Creek Park, "but also to remind whoever did this. We haven't forgotten. We won't stop. One day, justice will prevail." The reward for information leading to the arrest of Kayla's killer grew year after year. Starting with $25,000 raised by relatives, by 2006, it had reached $100,000 thanks to donations from concerned individuals and the support of several crime victim assistance funds. Posters with a photo of a smiling Kayla and an announcement of the reward were hung throughout Washington. From time to time, the police received calls, but none of them led to a breakthrough in the investigation. In 2003, Robert Clark made a decision that changed his life. He quit his job as a civil engineer at a large company where he had worked for more than 20 years and devoted himself entirely to finding his daughter's killer. "My colleagues thought I was crazy," Robert says, sitting in his home office, littered with folders and documents. "Maybe I was, but I couldn't just go back to my normal life and pretend nothing had happened. Every day I spent at my desk felt like a betrayal of Kayla." Robert turned one of the rooms in his house into a makeshift investigation headquarters. The walls were covered with photographs, maps, and newspaper clippings. On a large board was a chronology of events, names of witnesses, and potential leads. He studied all the available case materials, took courses in criminalistics, and established contacts with private investigators and retired police officers. "Sometimes I feel like I know more about this case than the investigators themselves," he says with a bitter smile. "I can name the time and place of every call that came to Kayla's phone the week before her death. I know the names of everyone who was at that party. I know the names of all the residents of the neighborhood where her body was found." Unlike Robert, his wife Carol did not find solace in taking action. The loss of her daughter plunged her into a deep depression. Once an energetic woman who worked as an elementary school teacher, she now rarely left the house, spending hours in Kayla's room, sorting through her things and looking at childhood photos. "I lost not only my daughter, but also a part of myself," she said in a quiet, lifeless voice. "You know, they say that time heals. That's not true. Time doesn't heal. It just teaches you to live with the pain. You get used to waking up every morning with this heaviness in your chest. You learn to smile when everything inside is screaming." Carol had to quit her job. She couldn't be around children anymore, each of whom reminded her that her own child would never grow up, never fulfill her dreams, never start a family. The doctors prescribed antidepressants, and she attended group therapy for parents who had lost children, but it didn't bring any real relief. In 2005, after a particularly difficult period, Carol was hospitalized with a nervous breakdown. "I didn't want to live," she admits. "I didn't see the point." Robert was consumed by his investigation. Michael had distanced himself. "I felt so alone." Michael, Kayla's younger brother, who was 17 at the time of her murder, chose his own way of coping with his grief. After graduating from high school in 2002, he left to study at the University of California, as far away as possible from Washington and the memories that haunted him at every turn. "I loved my sister," says Michael, now a grown man working as a programmer in San Francisco. "But I couldn't stay. The house had turned into a mausoleum, and my parents were like ghosts of their former selves. My father was obsessed with finding the killer, my mother with her grief, and I was only 17. I didn't know how to deal with it all." In California, Michael tried to build a new life, leaving the past behind. He rarely mentioned his family or what had happened to his sister. To his new friends and acquaintances, he was just Michael, a cheerful, somewhat reserved guy from Washington who had come to study computer science. "I think that was my way of surviving," he explains. "I couldn't relive the tragedy every day like my parents did. I needed to move on, at least outwardly." But despite his apparent detachment, Michael never truly let go of the memory of his sister. He kept a photo of her in his apartment, regularly donated money to the reward fund for information about her killer, and every year on her birthday, he lit a candle and spent the evening watching old family videos. While the Clark family tried to cope with their loss, each in their own way, the lives of Kayla's friends and acquaintances went on. Her classmates graduated from college, started careers, some got married, and some had children. Lauren Miller, Kayla's closest friend, got a job at a PR agency after graduating from Georgetown University. In 2004, she met Daniel Foster, a young school teacher, and they married a year later. "Kayla will always be a part of me," says Lauren. sitting in the cozy living room of her home in the suburbs of Washington. We dreamed of graduating from college together, finding jobs, being bridesmaids at each other's weddings. When I got married, I left an empty seat for her in the front row. It's silly, I know, but I wanted to believe that she was there in some way. Trevor Patterson, whose apartment hosted that last party, moved to New York after graduation and became a financial analyst. Jason Taylor, Kayla's ex-boyfriend, earned a master's degree in engineering and got a job at a technology company in Seattle. I couldn't form new relationships for a long time, Jason admits. Not because I still loved Kayla, although I'm sure a part of me will always love her. It's just that after what happened, I was afraid to get attached to people. I was afraid of losing someone again. Over time, media interest in Kayla's case inevitably waned. While local TV stations and newspapers regularly covered the investigation in the first few months after the murder, after a year or two, mentions became rare and then disappeared altogether, except for short notes on the anniversary of the tragedy. It's a natural cycle, explains journalist Kevin Monroe, who covered Kayla's case in 2001-2002. First, there's shock and widespread attention then. When there are no new leads, interest wanes. New crimes and new stories emerge. It's cruel, but that's how the media works. By 2006, the Kayla Clark case had virtually disappeared from public consciousness. For most Washington residents, it had become just another sad story from the past, one of many unsolved murders that happen in a big city. But for Detective Sean Riley, this case never became just a file in the archives. Even when he was busy with new investigations, he regularly returned to the materials, reread the testimony, and checked old versions in the hope of finding something that might have been overlooked. There are cases that haunt you, he says, that keep you awake at night. The Kayla Clark case was one of those. I kept thinking we were missing something, that the answer was there, but we just couldn't see it. In 2004, Riley secured a re-examination of the evidence using new DNA analysis technology, but the results were disappointing. No identifiable genetic material was found on the shell casings found at the crime scene. In 2005, Kayla's story was featured in a special television program about unsolved crimes. After the broadcast, the police received dozens of calls with alleged information, but, as before, none of the leads led to a breakthrough. It was mostly false testimony or speculation, Riley recalls. People craving attention or reward. Some genuinely wanted to help, but their testimony was based on guesswork, not facts. By the 5th anniversary of Kayla's murder, in October 2006, the annual memorial rally drew fewer people than in previous years. The weather was cloudy, with a light drizzle, as if the sky itself were mourning the lost life and unfulfilled hopes. Robert Clark, as usual, addressed the gathering. 5 years of searching and disappointment had left their mark. His hair was completely gray, deep wrinkles furrowed his face, but his eyes still burned with determination. 5 years have passed since our daughter was taken from us, he said. 5 years we have waited for justice. Some may think that the pain should have subsided by now, but that is not the case. Every day without Kayla is a day filled with pain, and every day without answers only intensifies that pain. He again called on anyone who might know anything to contact the police or him personally. He reminded them again about the reward. He swore again that he would not stop until he found the killer. After the ceremony, Lauren Miller, now Lauren Foster, approached Robert with her husband Daniel. She hugged her deceased friend's father and introduced her husband, who politely shook Robert's hand and offered his condolences. "I'll never forget Kayla," Lauren said, wiping away tears. "She was so special, so vibrant. We have a photo of her in our new apartment, the one where we're together in our freshman year. Daniel knows all my stories about her." Daniel Foster, an attractive man in his 30s, nodded, putting his arm around his wife's shoulder. "Lauren has told me a lot about Kayla," he said in a quiet, calm voice. "I feel like I knew her, even though we never met. It's a terrible tragedy. I teach at a school, and the thought that a young life can be cut short so suddenly is just unbearable. After Lauren and Daniel left, Detective Riley approached Robert. They stood silently for a while, looking at the memorial plaque erected in Kyle's memory. "I'm not giving up, Mr. Clark," the detective finally said. "We're not giving up. The case remains open, and one day we'll find the person who did this." Robert nodded, shaking Riley's hand firmly. Words were unnecessary. They both understood that with each passing year, the chances of finding the killer were becoming slimmer. That evening, when Robert returned home, he found Carol sitting in Kayla's room. She was holding her daughter's blue sweater, the same one Kayla had worn in the last family photo. "She never found out what happened to her application for an internship at the Washington Post," Carol said, without looking up. "They sent a letter 2 weeks after she died. She was accepted." Robert sat down next to his wife and put his arm around her shoulders. They sat there for a long time, in silence, surrounded by their daughter's belongings, memories of the life that could have been. Outside the window, dusk was slowly falling, ending another day without answers, without justice, without Kayla. 5 years had passed, but for the Clark family, time seemed to have stopped on that October night in 2001, when their world collapsed irrevocably. June 2019. Almost 18 years had passed since the day Kayla Clark was found shot dead in her car near Rock Creek Park. Washington had changed over the years, new buildings, new faces, new stories. But for those who knew and loved Kayla, time seemed to stand still. Robert Clark, now a gray-haired 65-year-old man, still began each morning by reviewing his daughter's case files. New folders and new notes appeared in his home office, but there were no significant advances in the search for the killer. A few blocks from where Kayla's body was found, construction began on a new residential complex. To do this, an old abandoned warehouse that had been vacant for more than 10 years had to be demolished. On June 12, 2019, a crew began dismantling the outer wall of the building. Eddie Thompson, a 32-year-old construction worker, discovered something unusual among the rubble. "I noticed something shiny in a pile of rubble," Eddie recalls. "At first, I thought it was just a piece of metal, but when I picked it up, it was a gun that had obviously been lying there for a very long time. The gun was badly corroded and covered in a layer of dust and dirt." Eddie immediately reported the find to his foreman, who called the police. For Detective Sean Riley, who had since retired but continued to consult on some old cases, the call was a turning point. "I was asked to come in when preliminary checks showed that it might be connected to the Clark case," Riley says. "As soon as I saw the gun, I knew it was the one. A Glock 19, the same caliber as the casings from the crime scene." The gun was immediately sent to the lab for analysis. Despite years of exposure to the elements, experts were able to recover the weapon's serial number. It turned out that the gun was registered to John Murphy, a Washington resident who reported it stolen in 2000, a year before Kayla's murder. "It was the first piece of the puzzle," says Alicia Morales, who by 2019 had become head of the Cold Case Investigation Unit. "We had a weapon that was presumably linked to the murder, but we needed to prove that link." Ballistics proved to be the deciding factor. Thanks to modern technology, experts were able to conduct a comparative analysis of the gun and the shell casings found at the crime scene, which had been stored as evidence all these years. "The results left no doubt," confirms ballistics expert James Kowalski. "The shell casings found at the scene of Kayla Clark's murder in 2001 were fired from this very gun. The unique marks on the caps matched." For the Clark family, the news of the weapon's discovery was a glimmer of hope after years of waiting. "When Detective Morales called and said they had found the gun, I couldn't believe it," recalls Robert Clark, his voice trembling with excitement. 18 years, 18 long years we waited for any kind of progress." Carol Clark took the news with cautious optimism. "I didn't allow myself to hope anymore," she says quietly. "After so many disappointments, so many false leads. But Robert always believed that one day the truth would come out." Michael Clark, Kayla's younger brother, who by then had become a successful programmer and started a family in California, flew to Washington immediately upon hearing the news. But the real breakthrough came when the gun was subjected to DNA analysis using the latest technology, which was not available during the initial investigation. DNA analysis technology has advanced significantly over the past 2 decades, explains Dr. Sarah Chen, a leading forensic expert. Now we can extract and identify DNA profiles from samples that were previously considered too small or degraded for analysis. Despite years spent in the wall of an abandoned building, microscopic particles of skin remained on the pistol's handle. After painstaking work, experts were able to extract a DNA profile that, as it turned out, did not belong to any of the previously tested suspects. When we got the DNA analysis results, it became clear that we needed to expand our search, says Morales. We started comparing the profile we got with criminal DNA databases, but we didn't find any matches. That meant the person who held the gun either never committed a crime or their DNA just wasn't in the database. The next logical step was to resume questioning everyone who had been associated with Kayla in the last days of her life. Much had changed in the past 18 years. Some people had moved, some had started families, and some had passed away. But most of the key figures were found and invited for further interviews. Time often works in favor of the investigation, Morales notes. People change, relationships break down, secrets become harder to keep. Someone who remained silent 18 years ago out of fear or loyalty may be willing to talk today. One of the first to be questioned was Jason Taylor, Kayla's ex-boyfriend. Over the years, he has married, divorced, and built a successful career at an IT company in Seattle. When detectives contacted him, he was not surprised. "I always knew that one day they would find the person who did it," Jason says. "All these years, I've lived with the thought that many still consider me a suspect, despite my alibi. Maybe now, it will finally end." The investigators paid particular attention to Lauren Miller, now Lauren Foster, Kayla's best friend, and the last person to talk to her at the party. During the conversation, the detectives noticed something interesting. Lauren, who had always seemed confident in her memories of her last conversation with Kayla, now showed some uncertainty. "I really don't remember if Kayla said anything about meeting someone after the party," she admitted. "I used to be sure she didn't, but over the years, I sometimes think she mentioned some kind of conversation that was supposed to take place." This slight discrepancy from her original testimony caught the detectives' attention. Why had Lauren's memories changed after so many years? Another interesting point was Lauren's mention that Kayla had seemed troubled in the days leading up to her death. "I didn't think much of it at the time," Lauren said. "But now, looking back, I realized she was kind of tense. It was as if something was bothering her, but she didn't want to talk about it." This coincided with information about strange phone calls and anonymous threats that Kayla had received during the last week of her life. Perhaps she had talked to Lauren about it after all, but her friend had simply forgotten or didn't think it was important. The interrogation lasted about 2 hours. Before leaving, the detectives asked Lauren's permission to take a DNA sample to rule her out as a suspect, a standard procedure when reopening old cases. Lauren agreed without hesitation. The detectives also wanted to talk to Daniel Foster, Lauren's husband, even though at first glance he had nothing to do with the case, as he had met Lauren after Kayla's death. "It was a routine procedure," Morales explains. "We wanted to interview everyone who might have heard something about the case from Kayla's loved ones over the years. Sometimes people share information with their spouses that they don't share with the police." Daniel Foster agreed to meet with the detectives the next day at the police station. A tall, fit man with an attentive gaze and calm demeanor, he came across as confident and open. "I've certainly heard a lot about Kayla from Lauren," he said at the beginning of the conversation. "It's a tragic story, the death of such a young, talented girl. I teach teenagers, and the thought that someone's life could be cut short so early has always been particularly painful for me." When the conversation turned to the recently found gun, the detectives noticed a slight change in his behavior. He began to blink more frequently, and his fingers trembled slightly as he adjusted his glasses. At the end of the conversation, as with Lauren, the detectives asked Daniel for a DNA sample. He agreed, though he expressed slight surprise. "I didn't even know Kayla," he said with a slight smile. "But if it helps the investigation, I'm certainly not opposed." Over the next few weeks, the detectives conducted dozens of similar interviews, gathering new testimony and comparing it with what had been obtained 18 years earlier. In some cases, they found minor discrepancies, which was not surprising. Human memory is imperfect, especially when it comes to events from long ago. But the main focus of the investigation remained the analysis of the DNA profile found on the gun. Samples collected from all those interviewed were sent to the lab for comparison. "It was a methodical process," says Dr. Chen. "We compared each sample with the profile found on the gun. Most of the results came back negative, which was to be expected. But we knew that sooner or later, we would find a match." In early August 2019, almost 2 months after the gun was found, what everyone had been waiting for happened. One of the DNA samples matched the profile on the gun's handle. The probability of a random match was negligible, 1 in several billion. "When I was told the results, I initially thought it was a mistake," Morales admits. "It was so unexpected. The person whose DNA matched the sample on the gun had never been a suspect in the original investigation." To confirm the results, a reanalysis was conducted, which confirmed the initial findings. There was no doubt left. The man who held the gun that killed Kayla Clark had been found. Robert and Carol Clark, upon receiving the news of the DNA match, felt for the first time in many years that justice could prevail. "I always knew this day would come," says Robert, his voice a mixture of bitterness and satisfaction. "For 18 years, I woke up every morning thinking that my daughter's killer was out there, living his life, maybe with a family, a job, friends, while Kayla was in her grave. Now that will come to an end." For the first time in many years, Carol took all the photo albums with pictures of Kayla out of the closet and arranged her awards and mementos on the mantelpiece. "I want her to know," Carol says, looking at a photo of her smiling daughter. "Wherever she is now, I want her to know that we never stopped. We never forgot." At the Washington Police Department, detectives were preparing for the final stage of the investigation, the arrest of the suspect and the collection of definitive evidence of his guilt. The Kayla Clark case, which had remained unsolved for many years, was finally nearing its resolution. The August morning of 2019 was unusually muggy. Washington residents sought refuge from the heat in air-conditioned rooms, and the streets were deserted. Nothing foreshadowed that this day would go down in criminal history as the day one of the capital's most shocking cold cases was solved. At 6:30 a.m., a Washington Police Special Task Force surrounded a 2-story house in a quiet suburb. The operation was planned with great care. The suspect had to be arrested before he could destroy any possible evidence. "Daniel Foster, open up. Washington Police." The officer's loud voice broke the morning silence. The door opened almost immediately. Standing in the doorway was a sleepy man in a t-shirt and shorts. Daniel Foster, 49, assistant principal of a high school, a respected educator, and husband of Lauren Miller, Kayla Clark's best friend. "Daniel Foster, you are under arrest on suspicion of the murder of Kayla Clark," Detective Alicia Morales said, showing her warrant. Foster's face, usually calm and friendly, contorted for a moment, but he quickly regained his composure. He put his hands out for the handcuffs without resistance. He turned around only once. Lauren was standing on the stairs, her hands pressed to her mouth, her eyes wide as she watched the nightmare unfold. The DNA test results left no doubt. The genetic material found on the handle of the gun used to kill Kayla Clark belonged to Daniel Foster. The probability of error was less than 1/1000%. "When I saw the results, my legs gave way," Morales recalls. We tested dozens of people connected to Kayla and got negative results. And then we tested Kayla's friend's husband, a man who we thought had never crossed paths with the victim, and got a perfect match. It seemed unbelievable, but facts are stubborn things. After Foster's arrest, investigators began painstakingly piecing together the chronology of events, connecting the scattered pieces of the puzzle. As it turned out, in 2001, Daniel Foster, then a 31-year-old novice teacher, was renting an apartment a few blocks from Georgetown University. He often visited a small cafe near the campus where he once saw Kayla. According to the arrested man, it was love at first sight, although for Kayla, it was a fleeting acquaintance. He started stalking her, Morales says. He found out her schedule, where she lived, who she hung out with. He tried to talk to her several times, but Kayla showed no interest. This angered him, and at the same time inflamed him even more. Foster admitted that he began calling Kayla from disposable phones and sending her anonymous letters. He wanted to scare her, to make her feel vulnerable. In his testimony, he described this state as an overwhelming obsession. On the night of the murder, Foster followed Kayla from Trevor Patterson's house, where a party was taking place. When the girl got into her car, he drove up beside her and asked to talk. Kayla, not recognizing him as her stalker, agreed. They drove to a diner, Morales continues, based on Foster's testimony. There, he opened up, confessed his feelings, and asked her to be with him. Kayla refused, saying she was going to report him to the police for stalking. That was the last straw. Foster took out a gun he had illegally purchased a few weeks earlier and forced Kayla to drive toward Rock Creek Park. There, on a deserted road, he shot her 3 times in the chest and then fled the scene. He hid the gun in the wall of an abandoned building near the park, hoping it would never be found. He thoroughly washed his car and burned his clothes. It seemed like the perfect crime to him. But the most shocking discovery was yet to come for investigators. About a year after the murder, Foster met Lauren Miller at a Georgetown University alumni reunion, where he had accompanied a friend. Upon learning that Lauren was Kayla's best friend, he began to court her deliberately. It was a calculated decision, says psychiatrist Dr. Elizabeth Moore, who was brought in to work on the case. Foster knew that Lauren, as the victim's closest friend, would be receiving information about the investigation. By marrying her, he gained access to that information and could be sure he was safe. For Robert and Carol Clark, the news of Foster's arrest was both a relief and a new shock. All these years he was so close, Robert says, struggling to contain his emotions. He came to memorial services with Lauren, offered his condolences, looked us in the eye. How could a person do that? But the hardest blow was to Lauren. The woman who lost her best friend had lived with her killer for 18 years without suspecting it. They had a business together, shared friends, and a well-established life. "I don't know how to go on living now," says Lauren, haggard, her eyes dull. "Every memory of our life together is poisoned. Every photo, every holiday we spent together, all these years I lived with a monster and didn't see it." The trial of Daniel Foster began in January 2020 and attracted enormous public attention. Despite irrefutable evidence, including DNA, ballistic analysis, and his own confessions, the defendant changed his testimony at the last minute, claiming his innocence. "This is typical behavior for a sociopath," comments Dr. Moore. First, cooperation with the investigation, detailed confessions, and then, when he realizes that he will not be able to avoid punishment, denial of the obvious. The trial lasted 3 months. The prosecution presented dozens of witnesses, and experts explained complex technical details to the jury in detail. But the most powerful testimony came from Lauren Foster, who, despite her emotional state, found the strength to speak in court. "I loved this man for 18 years, she said, looking directly at her ex-husband. "I believed him. I trusted him with my deepest secrets. And all this time, he was hiding the fact that he had taken the life of my best friend and used me as a cover." In April 2020, The jury returned a unanimous verdict of guilty of first-degree murder. The judge sentenced Daniel Foster to life in prison without the possibility of parole. After the sentence was announced, Robert Clark approached the convicted man. "It took me 18 years to find you," he said quietly, "and I would have spent as many more if necessary. Justice has prevailed, albeit belatedly." For the Clark family, the solving of the crime brought long-awaited relief, although it did not completely heal the wounds of losing their daughter. "At least now we know the truth," Carol says. "We know who took our girl's life and why. It won't bring Kayla back, but it allows us to finally let go of some of the pain." Robert Clark, who spent nearly 2 decades searching for his daughter's killer, admits that he feels a strange emptiness. "When you have a goal that you wake up for every morning, it keeps you going," he explains. "Now that justice has been served, I need to learn to live differently, perhaps by helping other families whose cases remain unsolved." Michael Clark, Kayla's younger brother, created a charitable foundation in her name to help fund cold case investigations and support the families of crime victims. And for Lauren Foster, a new chapter in her life has begun, the painful process of recovering from a betrayal that was impossible to imagine. "I don't know if I'll ever be able to trust people again," she admits. "But I know that Kayla would want me to move on. I'm doing this for her, for myself, and for everyone else affected by this tragedy." The Kayla Clark case has become one of the most famous examples of how modern DNA analysis technology is helping to solve crimes from many years ago. It reminds us that justice can prevail even after decades, and that the most heinous crimes can be hidden behind the facade of a normal, respectable life.